Hello, hello. Welcome to season 2 of the First Mind podcast. I am so elated to be back. It has been a long break. Ended the 18th episode of season 1 back in November. So I have been on quite a little break. A lot has happened, many transitions and changes and connections, and I'm just excited. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to continue our conversations about healing and the journey and life and existing. And um, this first episode, we have just a really excellent guest. You are going to be delighted with this human, as I am. And I'm excited for you all to meet Dr. Xiaohoa Ching.
I'm excited to be here.
For those of you who are new, and just joining season 2, I am Monica Wallace, and I am the host of the First Mind podcast. And this podcast is intended to be an entryway and soft landing to talk about all things healing. I often have practitioners come on and talk about different modalities and ways that we can heal ourselves. But the whole intention is just to normalize the healing journey, mental health, and just talk about some of these things that we just haven't been comfortable to talk about. So today, I think it's very appropriate, being that it is Valentine's Day, that we are going to have a conversation about love with somebody who did their entire doctorate program on the subject of love. And Shawa, I would love for you to tell listeners kind of about your background and who you are.
Thank you. Yeah, love is what preoccupies my days and moves me and motivates me. And I have a very specific definition of it now that I live by, but it has not always been that. It doesn't always meant the same thing that it does now. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I've had all of the evolutions of it. But when I talk about love now, I'm talking about curiosity and compassion. Like those are the two core fundamental strengths that we can lean into when we're feeling love. And yeah, I've come to that after not knowing and understanding what that could mean for my life. But now that I do, it is the most liberating, most intoxicating, most profound compass that I have, right? That I can lean on. And, I used to think that all the work that I did, you mentioned the education stuff, my whole motivation to do any work in this world has been what I thought was out of love, right? And it meant sacrificing everything because I love people and I love what we can be so much. But what has shifted is I love myself. In the midst of that, I am people. I am in community with all of my beloved people. And knowing that and knowing how to practice that and knowing what that could mean, that's the core of what I was curious about and what I wanted people to understand better. Because I think that's the hardest thing, is giving ourselves the love that we so freely give to other people.
I love that journey. I'm excited for listeners to hear about that transition from outward love to that more inward journey of love. I want to talk a little bit about how we met, specifically talk about our connection, our love connection, if you will, because you are very adamant about love being everywhere, like in everything, and you remind the people in your life about that. When I would talk to you about I want a partner, and you immediately would ask, well, why do you want a partner? What would be different about your life? And then I give whatever answer, and you'd be like, well, don't you have that now? Don't you have that in your life now? So it's a way to, I think, ground us to understand that there are many, many different forms of love. And I do consider our connection and the way that we met to be a sort of love story. So I just want to talk about what gave me a clue, a green flag, if you will, that you were my people, that you were a safe person, that you were a curious person, a loving person. And I think that's important to share, because a lot of times when we're in the world and we're looking for our people, it's helpful to have a guide, to have things that we look for. So what I look for, somehow when we initially met, it came out that, you know, you had graduated from Harvard and all these amazing things, the Forbes 30 under 30, like you've accomplished so much. And as we were talking about that, and like I felt like you were standing firm in your power of like, you know, I'm all of that. Like I'm a bad bitch, okay? Like, you know what I'm like, you were standing and affirming that. Um, but then you also said something. You said, you know, those are the things that are valuable in the material world. Like that's the language of the material world. It clued me that you had an awareness that you can learn from everything. That yes, in the material world, a PhD from Harvard means a lot. But then you also talked about, and I hope you'll share a little bit about this in the time that we have together now. You've also been ordained by Buddhists, and it almost, you said that like, I mean, Harvard is cool, but like, like, you know what I'm like, and so it helped me understand that you are a person who isn't just talking the talk, but you walk the walk. And that for me felt like that's the kind of people that I want to be around.
Mm.
Like who are in their power, who know themselves, who aren't making themselves small or minimizing themselves, because you didn't do that. But you let it be known that there are lots of dimensions to you. There are lots of facets, lots of nuances, and it's all relative and it's all valid. And that to
Mm.
me is somebody who is embodied in their love for their self.
Yeah.
So that was my green flag.
Well, you know, like, I think I said this too when we met. I was like, those are not the things that I lead with, those like accolades, those gold stars. Because the people who think those are the things that make me who I am, I know are not my people, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I think about what I did to get to those places or to do those things, not necessarily Harvard, I felt like the reason that made sense for me was because I already knew I didn't need the accolades and the prestige of Harvard, but I knew other people, if they wanted to take my message seriously of this love being important, like they believe people who go to Harvard, right? And I was willing to do that as long as it meant that I also, not only was I willing to do that, I knew that if the conversation is that things that come out of Harvard are things we should pay attention to, then I wanted things that were coming out of Harvard to be about love also. And that meant if I went there and I said what I needed to say, when I applied, when I interviewed, I was like, I want to talk about scaling love. I want that to be the language of like how we move in the future. But that was because I already arrived to a point where like when I got the Forbes 30 under 30, or when I did all of the work to like start a company to try to do that, right? Or like all of the different things that I thought I had to do to be worthy of love, to be worthy of admiration, to be worthy of my peace. Like if I earned this, if I won this, then maybe I would have that relief. Like that was all from a place of fear of not having love, right? And I think that like that's why those things signal to me a kind of fear, actually. It's like a not knowing of things that are even more valuable, more precious than like what other people could say about me, right? Or what the world thinks like should be. So that's why it's like it's beyond the flags of like, you know, yeah, knowing what pedigree I might have that might make me special. It's like so much more meaningful than that.
Yeah. Um, the second attraction to you, Shawa, is you just exude femininity too. So you're just like lush and soft, and you know what I mean? Like you just you smile and you're bright and there's a glow about you that um is also just very attractive. I am a person who has lived, I would say, for a good portion of my life, predominantly in my masculine energy. And I'm
Mm.
learning to transition to my feminine energy. So it's really satisfying to see a woman who is so powerful in so many different ways. Like, oh, and I hope that you know that about yourself, that I'm paying attention and I'm sure other people are paying attention too. Let's talk about what it means to scale love. Like, what does that mean to you? Can you explain to listeners how we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a fundamentally new idea, right? And when I use the language of scaling, I'm borrowing from like startup world or whatever, of like scaling a product, scaling a company, scaling growth, whatever. I was just so tired. I was in Silicon Valley. I was tired of that being the motivation, right? I was tired of that being the most urgent and pressing thing. And I felt like I knew at my core and in my like being that the most important thing that we could possibly do, like in our time on earth, is really just like give of ourselves what is the most beautiful expression of ourselves, and like live out our dreams so that people can see the beauty and the diversity of like what it means to be alive, but also in the midst of that, like see that in each other and celebrate it in each other and ourselves, right? And I really think that that kind of seeing, that kind of looking, that's what love is. And for so long I thought that like to solve all the big problems there were all these like really like technical things we had to do, like, you know, when I was in education, I was like, literacy is like the biggest detriment. Like, that is like, if we can fix that, we can fix so many other problems. I really believed that. I still believe like in the power of those things. But I realized that like, you know, I was looking around me and I was surrounded at the time by tons of leaders in the social impact space, whether they were community organizers or activists or startup founders. Everyone was thinking about how they could like solve all of these problems. And so many of them were like motivated by a love of people, right? And it was like really noble. Because of that, it was really easy to compromise like all of their well-being, all of the prioritizing of like their own needs and desires for the sake of the mission, for the sake of something bigger, in a way so that they both felt like they were expressing their love out loud, but also because they felt like they needed to be like worthy of the love, right? That like they needed, that we need to sustain ourselves. We need the love of other people. Like I don't believe in that being like a, you know, like a an unworthy thing to chase. But I do think that I also saw how many people burnt out so fast that like we couldn't sustain the work that we were trying to do, that the only thing that kept people going that I saw was the ability to take care of ourselves in the midst of that, the like knowingness of our own boundaries for our own well-being, and also an understanding of that being really central to the long game of this, right? And so at the core of like what I think is required to scaling love is that like every single person have a fluency around them about what it means to take care of themselves, to love themselves, to offer themselves compassion and curiosity, and to understand themselves enough to be motivated by what they learn through that. And then only then can we go out and scale love beyond ourselves, right? And my focus was especially on leaders, right? I was thinking about leaders of color, especially because of like the unique, I think, tension of having to navigate positions of power in spaces that just didn't look like us, didn't serve us for so long. And I just thought about what it meant to have the tools and the skill set to actually navigate that very specific realm so that we could then use whatever power and platform we're working towards with actual energy and like focus, because we were pouring into ourselves, right? So the questions I had and the reason I was thinking about it for so long was just like, what does it look like to actually show people that this can be a practice, right? That you can build a muscle memory for self-love and a language for it, a frame for it, so that you're aware the same way that you're aware of like other deeply embedded social norms that maybe aren't even as good for you, right? But like you change the language so that it's all in favor of lovingness towards yourself and towards others. And yeah, I mean, the things that came out of that research in that time was just like how innate some of these things are, how much of it exists in so many other cultures, how removed we feel from it, but also how intuitive it can be, and how good it just feels once it's in our body, that once we're practicing it, because it's like our basic nature that we're returning, which is a state of love. Just like a lot of joy in actually, you know, like going and getting really heady and feeling like, you know, of course I could like cite a bunch of people who are doing research into all kinds of modalities. but for it to be that, like, it's so basic, there's so many little basic things about it that we can just really be intentional about, like, that's such a relief, right? That this isn't some impossible thing, it just sounds really grand.
I think that is what is, to me, profound about this journey. As you're saying that, my next question is, what do you think is making love so hard? Like, why is it so hard for us to figure this out? But as you're describing it, and especially when you talked about there being some intention behind Black and Brown people learning to care for themselves and take care of the world, I just think about my own journey and the the amount of deprogramming that I have to do. So when we're talking about people of color, we're also talking about people who aren't loved well
Mm,
or cared for well
mm,
in the world. And so
mm,
there's a lot of programming for me not to love myself. So in addition to like trying, like I think, fundamentally on my journey, part of being able to care for myself is rooted in my being able to accept myself, right? And like there's just a lot of layers to something that sounds so simple. And for me, just kind of like you said, it really is a daily practice. Like it is, I compare it to learning how to hold my breath underwater so that I can swim. Like the
mhm,
goal is not for me to turn into a fish. The goal is
mhm,
that I can sustain myself in this environment that is not necessarily comfortable for longer stints of time. And so
mm,
I really look at loving myself as a practice, and I have to have a lot of grace because there still are voices in my head, Shawa, that say you're not worthy of love. So I'm just interested to hear from your perspective, what do you think is the obstacle to us being able to love ourselves and then scale this love outwardly to everybody else?
I mean, you said deprogramming, like decolonizing your brain, whatever you want to call it, right? Like there are so many layers, especially in the US, right, of like being born into a culture that tells you immediately that you're unworthy, right? Like we're so pure and loved when we're babies. And then just as we grow into ourselves, we grow into the voices that surround us that tell us what is right. And we trust that like we can take that as guidance and word. But so many of those messages tell us that we'll never be enough, that we're unworthy, that we have to earn whatever it is that, we want, including love, that we have to be worthy of it. And that means that, like at any point, any flaw, any sense of lack of goodness that we have, any suspicion that we have that we are imperfect is enough for us to latch onto to think, oh, okay, well that's why I can't be loved, or that's why I don't live in love, right? But I think about it like for people who have been in partnerships where they felt like they really had expectations of their partner, right? I think thinking about those expectations that you have for another person to give you some kind of love, attention, whatever needs you have, like to meet, having them met. I feel like if you really are good at being a partner to yourself and like loving yourself, then you can use that same language to help you take care of yourself the way you want to be taken care of,
Mm.
right? But the idea that we would be worthy of that kind of focus and attention and care, like so many things get in the way of that, right? So many other priorities and preoccupations, other people are the fastest way out of our like engagement with ourselves. And it's not normal, right? Like people, I don't think, are having these conversations enough about the kind of ways that they talk to themselves and treat themselves without it being or seeming self-indulgent or preoccupied with self.
Yeah, there is like a guilt, especially I think it's meaningful that we're having this conversation right now in the climate of everything that is happening in the US and around the world because there is this guilt in feeling good, in feeling joyful when it seems like everything around you is falling apart and there's so much suffering. And so I have just become very intentional in the joy. Like it is very clear to me more than anything else, that joy recharges my battery. And so I have to have joy in my life no matter what is happening around me, or I won't have the energy to be of service to anybody. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a guilt that comes with being joyful in times of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I used to be, you mentioned Buddhism earlier. I used to be really skeptical of Buddhism, of like pacifist ideology, right? Like, especially when I was a community organizer in my early, like, 20s, you know, like, there's just so much fire. I was so close and proximal to the, like, struggles of things at that point that, like, I was like, I don't have time to not be on the front line, you know, like, going all in. And not doing that is lazy and also like just like an easy getaway from reality. And now I feel so different about that because
Yeah.
I feel like the way that I was throwing myself out there and putting myself on the line was out of fear and not out of love, right? It was about an urgency of what needed to happen, and it was a fight, right? So it was very reactionary. And I think the place that I operate from now is so much of a peacefulness, of prioritizing my own peace, and then being able to think from a place of clarity and like more compassion just all around for a more rounded perspective. And when I say that, I'm like, I mean very intentionally, like, how deep can I go into understanding so much more of this, right? How much more personal can I get? Um, rather than, yeah, just like taking things at face value, which is what I feel like people are doing right now with like what is what feels like things falling apart, right? But I think there's like a natural order of things, and the universe is always on time. And that, you know, I was thinking about this. People say like power corrupts, right? But I think poverty corrupts too, right? And they're often seen on this like dichotomy of like this or that. And I think I don't even just mean poverty of like resources. I mean like poverty of energy, poverty of hope, right? And I think that you can only move from a place that isn't corrupted by a kind of like extreme if you are able to maintain some kind of peace of mind and like sense of reality that is separate from all of the other stories around you. Like, what does it mean to like stop where you are, feel into your body, notice the beautiful things around you alongside things that are hard, right? See that there's so much more than just a single story of what's happening, and then move.
Yeah. I almost feel like, I mean, and we've heard this before, that hustle is strategic, right? Like that busyness, that conditioning of like you have to be going and going and going is such an antithesis to what you really need to be doing, which is grounding and grounding and grounding. And I think we've just seen a lot of attempts to ascend
Hmm.
without the grounding. You know what I mean? So I like that, what you said about power corrupts. I know listeners, it's Valentine's Day and we're like getting real heavy into, you know, the shadowy, more shadow parts of love, but I do want to spend some time talking about romantic love because I know that that's the love that people want, to hear about. Um, so one of the ways, I don't know if you define this as a way that you love yourself, but you've been traveling nomadically,
Hmm.
and you've been doing that for 7 years, which is just amazing to me. I love your life. How do you think that that journey has helped shift and change the way that you love yourself, but then also your engagement romantically, and your ability to have romantic love in your life when you are
Hmm.
living kind of everywhere?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that I would have this lifestyle, like this going and going and going, mostly on my own, if I wasn't feeling so secure in my relationship with love. Because I think that one of the stories we're sold, right, is that like partnership is the most important thing in your life. Having another person in your life is the most important thing, or like it defines your life and it gives it meaning. And I think that can be true for people, but I don't think that it has to be true for everyone, and certainly not me. I think after one of my like really long-term relationships, this is years ago, I remember reflecting afterwards and thinking, wow, like first I wrote him a letter to thank him for teaching me more ways to love myself because of how loving he was, right? But also, I realized like I don't have to fall in love. I can live in love. Like I can be in love with everything around me. There can be an intimacy that I have with the world that makes me feel like not only is there so much to love, but like how lucky am I and how clearly do I love myself that I'm giving myself these opportunities. And then it's like a reminder all of the time, like, wow, you really love yourself, right? Like every single time I show up in a new country, I find where the flower markets are and I buy myself flowers. And that is like another part of welcoming myself and loving myself, right? Like I draw a bath wherever there's a like huge bathtub or whatever. And all of that is like, it helps with the practice. It helps with the practice of what does it look like to give yourself love, but also what does it look like in terms of what you expect. I think my expectations for what a partner has to offer me or bring for them to become a part of my life is that like it enhances an already beautiful life in which I am already in love with the way that I live, the way that I move, right? And I think that's a really beautiful like grounds for another kind of love. But I'm also like just a diehard romantic, and I love the idea of serendipity and like taking lovers everywhere I go, and like that was a big part of like the motivation for being able to be free and like let stories, like romantic stories, whirlwind romances happen. But in the midst of that, I also found myself like in long-term partnerships in that too, and I think like it really is about an openness and an intentionality about why we relate to others, why we decide to be in partnership with other people. And I think it really helps me as I like move through the world to constantly be thinking about, okay, what are the like qualities of my life that let me know that I am living a life that I love? Like what do I know to be like features and fixtures of that? Like right now and for a long time it's been like I get to see the moon regularly. I don't know why that's a thing, but like I have to be somewhere where like that can happen, where I get to spend time just looking at the moon. Like the pace of my life has to be such that like I walk outside, I see it, and that means that I get to spend time and I can just stop in my tracks, right? A good partner is somebody who complements those kinds of things, like sees the moon and says, look, and draws my attention, right? It's like championing both those values that I have, but also like has their own. And, there's this Khalil Gibran quote about love being a sea that washes up between two shores, right? That it's like this thing that I think that also works for me because I think about what that can mean in terms of independence and being sovereign in my own love, right? And sharing a love. So yeah, I think knowing that really helps me think about what and how love can show up, like romantic love can show up if I live a very non-traditional life, right? Like it expands the scope of what that could be. And I just meet people all the time who are loving themselves and other people in so many different ways. And like that's really helpful, right? It helps like
Yeah.
the story of like this is what a relationship looks like. This is how
Yeah.
partnership looks like. The goals are always X, Y, and Z. It's like, no,
Yeah.
not for everyone. And they're happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember over a decade ago, I wrote like all of the attributes that I wanted my love interest to have. And that was like a thing that everybody was doing as we were writing these lists. And that was how we were going to manifest this great love. And what in reflection, I think happened is I did manifest people with things that checked off the list. But as I went through the cycles of those relationships, what I really learned is like, it's not a list, not for
Mm-hmm.
me. Like, it's a feeling. Like, I'm looking for a feeling. Like, there's no, like, it's not, it really isn't like a bullet pointed list. Like, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I will know the person by the way I feel. And that is how I look at it now. And it's not just how I look at drawing in romantic love, but it's how I look at connections in general. Like,
Mm.
I am in a season in my life where I am very aware that I am here for a purpose. And in order for me to fulfill the purpose, I need to be around good people. I need to have a lot of love in my life. I need to have a lot of peace in my life. Like, I can't complete the mission without money, luxury, people. Like, I need all of the things, like, for me.
Right.
And I deserve to have all of those things because I am here to do God's work. If you
Mhm.
believe in God, like, whatever you
Mhm.
believe in, like, I'm here to add something to humanity, and I believe we all are. But it has never been more clear to me than now that in order for me to accomplish that, I need to feel good in my body. And there are certain things that make me feel good. For you, it's the moon. And I think that you are absolutely right. When we're looking at aligning with another human, if our value is the moon, their value has to be the moon too. Like, that to me is what alignment is. So I like the way that you said that. And I hope that listeners are hearing that, because it's a different, to me, it's a different way of engaging with the world. And to
Mhm.
know that I'm also, and this is still hard for me because I have a historically anxious attachment style. So I want love when I like want it now. Like, I want the love
Mhm.
of my, like, I like, there's, it's difficult for me. Sometimes I can be like, my inner child is spoiled and like having a tantrum and like, I want romantic love right now today. But learning to live every day, like, noticing the love. Like, there's so much love. Like, I have so much love in my life. So yeah, I don't know, Shawa. Do you, with this intention and this way of living, do you still crave a partner? Or I don't know if you ever craved a partner, but like, is that, and how do you work through that craving?
Hmm. Like, so one of the conclusions of, like, if there's ever a conclusion on all the ways that we're thinking about things, but like, of understanding what it means to scale love and then sustain that, the sustaining part requires being loved, right? It requires community, it requires accountability. And oftentimes people find that in partnership, right? I think that I have such a strong, beloved community, like a community of people who are my life partners without needing to be my romantic partners, right? And to have that love in my life to sustain me, it does make it less of a priority, I think, to think about needing a partner or wanting a partner. I also, I mean, I travel a lot and I spend a lot of time solo in cafes, restaurants, hotels, doing these drawings. And while I'm doing these drawings, I'm often hearing people in conversations or on dates. And sometimes I have to be honest, like, I'm like, God, I'm so grateful I don't have to talk to anyone right now, that I can hear my own voice, that I can be present with myself. And at the same time, like, I love falling in love. I love the way the world feels when you are in love with someone. I love the way that things get colored by the magic of something reminding you of someone that is precious to you in a kind of way that is different than, you know, just your friends or your family or whatever. I do think that there's like a very special quality of like delight and joy that comes from that. And I don't know that that comes just from like finding one person and being in a partnership for forever, right? Like, maybe that comes from a multitude of stories in which I have love in my life. And at the same time, like, I'm very open. I'm open to whatever happening. And I think that that is kind of the grounds that I want to find a partnership from anyways, right? Like, I think to your point about like having a list, I think we start thinking about what it is we're looking for. Even a feeling, right? We start kind of having this like expectation of what that will look like when it arrives. I think like we never actually know what's going to make us happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the battle with like living more intuitively all of the time. You start to question whether or not it's your intuition or it's old stories resurfacing, or like old habits, old muscle memory. You're like, can I trust myself, right? So I think I'm feeling that way too about like partnership. It's like sometimes I wonder, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm missing something. I think before my last relationship, I finally got to the point where I was like, listen, I'm thrilled with my life. I might be missing something here. What if my life could be even better because I had a partner? Like, and what if that enhanced everything? Like, what if it leveled up all this like experience that I'm having? And it wasn't long after that that I ended up meeting someone and entering into a long-term relationship and thinking like, okay, this is my person. We're gonna get married. They had you're talking about the list. Like I thought I'd gotten rid of my list, and here they are, like in the back of my mind. I'm like, check, 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 check. This has to be it, right? And I think that actually made it harder. It was like the fact that I wanted to try to be early in a relationship, that I wanted to be mindful. I had read this book by David Rico called How to Be an Adult in Relationships. And I thought it was the most beautiful description of how to be in a partnership. I thought, oh, if this is what relating feels like or could look like, being in a partnership could be, then like, I want that. I want to try that. You know, and I was like pretty excited about like meeting someone to experiment with. I think the stubbornness of wanting to be good at being in a relationship, the desire to be like good at being patient and curious and compassionate made me stay longer than I needed to, even after I knew that wasn't my relationship, that wasn't the place where I was going to get the most love. So I think, yeah, like it's a lot of like learning through what you're saying about the feeling that we get with someone, really learning to trust that and learning to know that that could be the real compass to follow, the real like orientation to pay attention to, right? Of like in my
Yeah.
body, how at ease do I feel? How safe do I feel? How seen am I? How appreciated am I? And like, how
Yeah.
curious am I? Do they inspire that in me? You know?
You said this is not the place where I'm going to get the most love.
Mm,
That's an interesting guide, because I think there are a lot of times in our lives where we stay in places where we know there's more love than what is being offered to us. And we stay, like you said, because no, we want to be good at love. Like I got to be good, in order to get the love, I got to work hard and be worthy of the love. And part of
listen,
that is being
I thought
loyal and
that, yeah, I thought that like if I practiced the right skill set, maybe I just wasn't good enough. And that also I could become more worthy of more of their love. Or they would change, I would change, we would grow together, and then the love would be stronger. That is a very like seductive promise that could inspire like admirable patience, but that's different than like staying with someone or in a situation because of fear, right? Fear of not being loved by someone else or anyone else, fear of not being good enough or good at like being in a relationship. I think all of those things are like, you can only feel certain things with other people, right? So there it's really tempting to be like, well, this is why would it be any different with anyone else, right?
yeah.
And I think that's not true.
Yeah. I think what you said about there's so much to loving yourself and accepting yourself, but also the knowing that comes with that of yourself. Because I think in my experience, what has happened is when I didn't know myself well, I had these thoughts about what were non negotiables. But then if somebody showed up and maybe they were super cute, or maybe they, had a lot of material to offer, or I don't know, whatever, then I start like negotiating my negotiable. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
there's this anxiety of there's not going to be enough love to go around, or there's not going to be like I have to get this person and attach to them, because what if nobody else comes? Like what if
Mm-hmm.
I never have another opportunity to partner up with somebody? And it is so much of that thinking is rooted in just fear like that there's just not enough love.
Mm-hmm.
Shawa, so yeah, being intentional about your practice and loving yourself, accepting yourself. I think for me, what it's doing is it's making me stand more firmly in my non negotiables of what love is supposed to be like. And so, because I can stand in that power, it also allows me to connect with somebody who's standing in their power, right? And then the two of us, like, are very powerful, is how I see it. But I
Yeah.
can't, there's no option any longer for me to align to anything out of fear that there won't be enough.
Mm-hmm. I
It
mean,
just doesn't serve me.
no, and I think that like the reality is when we're with someone, like the vulnerability, the fear, it's magnified. Like being out in the world, being in my best looks in the best places and feeling like I'm blessing myself with all of the abundance that the world has to offer. Like it's really easy for me to feel like, wow, okay, I have all the love in the world because I love me this way. But being with somebody else means that I have to question whether or not I'm actually worthy of love based on how they're treating me, how they're making me feel in that moment. And all of a sudden, and like, I'm not saying that as fact, I'm saying that as feeling, right? I'm saying that in those moments, that is what can happen, the way that the mind starts going and worrying about whether or not those things are true, whether or not like the reality is still that you are worthy of love based on, and you're looking for all these clues, all this validation. Like it just happens because we have expectations in relationships to be loved, right? To be cherished, to be adored. And I think that there's a lot of knowing that that's what I want and then being worried all of the time that that's not being shown to me and then turning it around and blaming the other person and taking away all the power I have to be like, if I loved myself more in this moment, I would notice that there is this kind of like fear in me that's emerging, right? How can I be
Yeah.
gracious and gentle with myself in knowing that, communicate, ask for what I want, right? Like, and know that I'm worthy of that. I think that's a whole other skill set that is required to like getting the love that we want. But I'm so guilty of like being so self assured and confident on my own and then entering into a relationship and feeling like I am a black hole for affection and affirmation and validation. I'm like, it's never enough. I want more. I need constant, right? But I know that about myself in a way that it has taught me and told me what it is that is happening in a relationship that I need to be more communicative about, more cognizant of, more conscious of. And it's on me to fix that. Like it's not it's like I can be loved in a lot of ways that are really healing and beneficial, but it's also on me to notice what's happening, right? To like
Yeah.
feel that discomfort.
Yeah. I agree. I often hear women, especially, well, men and women, you often hear in the world that love is broken and there are no quality humans left. And there's a lot of just what feels like war between people who say they want to love each other. I often think about the many ways that we project and manifest that energy into our life. And so, you know, I think all the time about women who will say, like, there's no good men, but they still only engage with men. If you don't think there's any good men, but then you only engage with men, then you have to be settling and thinking or wanting and expecting the men to show up differently. So I also think there's there's the element of loving yourself, but then also being able to recognize that we're all trying to love ourselves. Like we're all like everybody is showing up the best that they can. Like there's an abundance of good people. Like when I leave to go out in the world, like I've made it a habit to thank God for all the amazing people that I'm about to meet. Like thank you for all the good energy that's about to come into my life, because when I shift my mind to there being an abundance of good humans, that's all I ever meet is like all these good humans. But I'm very intentional about it. And when I hear people say like there's no good people left, I feel sad
Mhm.
for that, because I remember believing or thinking that to some degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that yes, there's like a huge a big narrative out there of like and it's out of exhaustion, it's out of feeling defeat, it's out of a loneliness and a desire, right? Like it's out of not having our needs met, it's out of not seeing each other, right? And I think that, you know, one of the things that has changed and that I can observe in over the years is that the time I'm willing to spend really getting to know someone helps me to expand how deeply I love all people that I meet, right? Like, and what I mean is, I don't stop listening or asking questions when I hear something or when I see something about them that normally I could attach to a story about them being something that I don't like or I disagree with or I don't feel comfortable with. Like, if I stay curious enough, I often find that, like, at the core, they're still just as human. And sometimes the things that they're saying are just out of, like, out of things that can tell me that in this moment, this is who they are, but this is not who they're going to be forever.
Mm.
But at the core of them, like, is there a human in there that, like, I can see is, like, emerging that is just goodness and purity? Because I believe in that, right? That's what it's like the love that I have is, like, trying to get that out of them. It's like magnet to magnet, right? And the longer I sit with them, the longer I stay curious, the easier it is to see that, like, emerge. I don't think that people do that enough. I think we're looking for red flags all the time. I'm not saying ignore red flags. Let's get that straight. I just mean, you know, when we're always looking for failure, disappointment, when we have expectations in our minds and we don't question where those come from, right? If they're really ours or not, then of course people are going to fall short, right? Like, because we're always looking for them to match that, to affirm that. So I don't think it's the case that, like, there are no good men or good women out there for each other. I think it's that we've really started isolating ourselves, finding comfort in our aloneness. Like, I've been talking about being solo this whole time. There's a lot of comfort in that aloneness that, like, makes it easier for us to just dismiss as part of the story that the reason we're alone is because it's just not, there's nothing out there for us, right? I don't think that's us being brave in love. I think that's us
Mm.
being hopeless.
Yes. Yeah. And I can see all of it. Like I can see the exhaustion and hold space for that, just being tired of it. But I can also see the intention in not getting so wrapped up in your exhaustion that you give up, because the desire doesn't go away, right? Like even in all this isolation and feeling good in my, because I do really feel good in my alone time in my solitude, but the desire to be connected with people, whatever capacity, doesn't go away,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. I want you to talk about you've outlined many different practices through this conversation of ways that you love yourself. And so I hope people were picking up on those cues as practices and things that you can incorporate into your lives as well. But I want you to talk about a specific practice that you shared with me, which is, I want to call it a feelings party. Make sure that I'm describing it the right way. But
Absolutely a feelings party.
okay, yeah. So I want you to tell listeners about this practice of hosting your feelings party and what that is.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, I think I've alluded to spending time with myself a lot, right? Like, why do I do that? It's because it's one of the fastest ways that I can return to remembering who it is that I love, to, like, fall in love with me. But what does that look like if I'm, like, really looking, if I'm really curious? It doesn't mean just looking in the mirror and being like, yes, yes. That's part of it. That's a very small part of it, right? The rest of it is seeing how complicated, how big, how expansive my world is internally, and being able to recognize and appreciate that as both a huge feat and also exhausting, right? And also, like, just so much more what we were saying before about grounding, like how do I ground in a place of, like, even knowing who I am in this moment? So feelings parties is like a practice. I would say a meditation is another way to put it. I've like taught it as a guided meditation, actually like guest teach every single year in the same class this exact meditation of calling all of our feelings forward. But it's really about like learning how to be a good host, being a good host at a party, and seeing and welcoming all of your guests without any judgment. Like that's the key part, without any judgment, and just being surprised at like all of the feelings that you host, who they are. Maybe they're not feelings, they're like sensations or like concepts that are like preoccupying you, right? But I was really inspired. There's a poem by Rumi called The Guest House. I spent a lot of time in hotels. Before I used to like be nomadic, I used to write in hotels all the time because I was courting my muse. She had very expensive taste, and she just, like I felt like I had to go somewhere grand and inviting, and hotels were made to be that, right? The hotels that I was going to were made to be that. So I think I already had in my mind this kind of like attitude of what it would be like to create a space to invite everyone in. And the feelings parties and the Rumi poem are all just about like opening your door, seeing who arrives, and greeting every single guest with gladness, with joy, sitting down for tea. This does not have to be like, I'm not talking about going through and digging up all the skeletons in your closet. Like that's another kind of modality of healing. That's another meditation. This is something that I think you can stop and do at any point in any place. You can do it as a visualization of just like sitting, doing a body scan, imagining the table is set exactly the way you want it and exactly the place that you think is most inviting, and just thinking, okay, who's here? And just like it's like a seance, like you're a medium. You just let every feeling arrive. So actually, I knew you were going to ask me about this. So I was like, I haven't done a feelings party in a minute. Let me do that. And I was sitting in this beautiful bar, like this gorgeous music, candlelight. And I was like, this is a good place. This is a good place to host it. And the first feeling arrived, and it wasn't even a feeling, it was nostalgia. I guess it's a feeling. I don't want to get technical, but it was nostalgia. And I've never had nostalgia show up before. And I think that's the thing. It's like, I don't know what's going to show up. I always think it's going to be anxiety. I think anxiety is always there. It's going to show up first. And it's been this way where I've been having this practice where it's not that I can see it. It's not like I'm like playing Inside Out, the movie, in my head. It's not like that. It's really like I can see, it's almost like their name tags show up. It's like I can sense who it is, the feeling of them. Like somebody once asked me like if there's a gender or like a face or whatever, and I think every single person experiences this so differently. Like I'm always so surprised after guiding people through this meditation and this practice to hear them like debrief and reflect about who showed up and how, because it's like there's no right or wrong way. It just happens if you create the space for it. So I think it's a really exciting practice. I mean, I think it's like also just a precursor to parts work or integrated family systems therapy. Like there's so many ways in which you can deepen this practice of being alert to all that's present. But like as a quick fire way to be like, hold on, let me check in with myself, and not be about yourself being the feeling. Yourself is not, I'm anxious or I'm angry or I'm excited. Like you stop identifying with that feeling or with those feelings, and you see that there's a multitude, that there's different perspectives from each one. Yeah, so I take it a little bit further. I write from each feeling. I let them speak. Like nostalgia today was reminding me that I was actually thinking about the Palace Hotel in San Francisco where I first started doing feelings parties and where I used to spend a lot of time. And I'm going back to California after a long time, after being out of the country for like almost 5 months. And I've been feeling a little anxious. There's a lot happening there that I'm not like thrilled to be surrounded by, right? And there's a lot of fear around what it means to go back to a place that I don't feel the same kind of magic around at this moment. And it helped me remember that leaving a place is also a part of making it precious. That like moving on allows me to have memories and something to want to return to. And like that's beautiful, right? And that it encouraged me to remember that there was something to go back to that I have romanticized, that is beautiful. And so I thought that was really nice because I have been having a lot of fear. I thought fear was the one that was going to show up first. But it was nostalgia being like, hey, there's a message for you.
I like that, Shawa. Is there a feeling that shows up to the party like every time?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention anxiety because it like is like is a common thing. I mention it because usually it's the first one to show up.
Mm,
Usually, if I'm sitting and writing, there's a restlessness in my being that has like called
yeah.
me to stay still, and so it's oftentimes that like anxiety shows up, and usually it is like leading the way for sadness. You know, who's like really timid and hangs back and doesn't come out as much and like lets other
Mm,
feelings lead it's for it. So it's like it's knowing and being curious about what it means to see the same feeling all the time and being like, it's not because I'm anxious, it's because it's always attached to all these other feelings, all these other
oh,
ideas that I'm having.
it's such a good practice. I'm thinking about spaces where I have strong feelings and what that means,
Hmm.
Yeah, because what you're describing is like setting up the meditation in a way that you're going to a space and being intentional about the space. What about when you're in a space that it doesn't feel good in your body?
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you do the same? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think absolutely you have an opportunity then, especially to be curious. I think like
yeah.
it doesn't have to be so part of the Rumi poem is like, you know, they're all guests and each one of them has a message, a gift for you. So like
Mm-hmm.
be a good host and let each one sit down to tea. Even if it's a crowd of sorrows that clears your whole house out of all its belongings. So like it's not that these guests are gonna be the guest list that you have curated and that you desire, right? But it's
Uh,
sometimes actually that it's a rowdy guest that we can't ignore, that demands our attention and is acting up because we are ignoring it, because we have not acknowledged it, because the message
uh,
is ripe and overdue and it is urgently trying to get our attention. And so I think,
uh,
especially in those moments of like conflict or distress, it's really good to be able to sit down with the feeling and know also that like we are not distressed. We are not
yeah.
in crisis, right? It is
Yeah.
something we're hosting.
The last thing I want to talk about, because it is Valentine's Day, one of my favorite quotes is I am a lover with or without a love interest. Like it's something along those lines. What would you say for people who do have feelings that come up around this holiday? Um, how they can celebrate it in a way that makes them feel good, like regardless of what their situation is or what is happening in their environment are like it's so many things that are distracting us from being able to sit and be rooted in our love. Like real things are happening. So aside from just maybe not having a romantic partner, what would you say are some practices that we can do as we maybe are feeling a way about this February 14th, if we have any attachment to that date, to make ourselves feel good in our body and feel love and feel like we can re-energize ourselves in a way that helps to maybe make that day about projecting it outwardly so that everybody can experience love, the feeling of love.
I mean, I think what you said at the very end of that, like how you can experience that feeling of love, I think that is like the bread and butter of what it is to celebrate that day. It's like so much of the commodification of the holiday is like all these gifts you can give, right? Like these flowers and these chocolates. It's about like acts of affirming and celebrating that you love someone, that you are cherished. And I think, you know, like I can hear in the back of my mind, like chronically single friends being like, I don't want to celebrate by myself, you know, like just refusing any more like singledom on a holiday that is about being partnered. And I still am like emphatically like persistent, the same way that like when you told me that you wanted a partner, I was like, okay, but like then what would happen? What would you get? How would you feel? I think like asking yourself, imagining like from your answer, what it would be like, what it would feel like, and trying to access that in your body and think about what would happen if you were celebrating Valentine's Day with someone. What would you do? What would you get? I think a lot of it is about wanting to receive a lot. I think that's the like
Yeah.
the longingness. It's like, I want somebody to take me out. I want, flowers. I want chocolate. It's like, can you give that to you and just like appreciate that that's something you can do, that you have agency? Can you pamper yourself? Can you tell yourself all of the things that are incredible and beautiful and wonderful about yourself? Can you feel that in your body with sincerity? Because if you can't do that, then like, how are you going to know when somebody else is doing it for you? How are you going to believe them when they try if you
So
have not
good.
accessed that? So take whatever guidance you can get from your list of dreams of what you wish was happening that day and put it into practice for yourself. Because you can. This is
Such
coming
a
from
good.
somebody who like just went last night to like the most stunning restaurant on like the 76th floor, and I asked them for a view of the restaurant to draw, and they give me a view of the whole city. And I just remember thinking, like, this is the ultimate date spot, and I am here, and I've taken myself here, and I look gorgeous, and I'm gonna celebrate that. I'm gonna tell myself that. I'm gonna give myself whatever I
Yes.
want.
I love that, Shawa. I love that. You referenced your drawings a couple times in the interview, and I don't know if people know that about you, but as we close out, I want you to be able to talk to people about any ways that you would want them to stay connected with you in the future, but also please tell people about these drawings because I have been fortunate enough to be in your presence when you have been drawing. And I love not just the actual physical drawings, which are amazing, but also just the intention behind the drawing, the passion, like your love. Like, this is really an affair that you are, a beautiful affair that you are in with the world. And it's like your way of documenting that romance. And so I loved being able to observe it happening, but maybe if you can just kind of give the people a visualization of what that looks like and what that means when you're talking about your drawings.
I mean, honestly, it's so aligned to this conversation on love because and intimacy and like not just being in love, but like living in love. It started as a practice of wanting to be intimate with my life. And I still remember when I first started doing drawings in cafes, it was because I realized if I was really present with the moment, if I was intimate with my life, like I would be able to recall like the feel of the wood grain on the tabletop and like the way that the steam moved from my teacup, like that like sensuousness, that like real visceral presence of all things would be something that is like etched into my mind in that moment because I've been intimate with my life. The drawings are really just a practice of arriving to beautiful places because that is one of the things that like moves me and reminds me and affirms to me that I am loving myself by taking myself to places that are beautiful because I want to, because I value it. And then actually seeing it, like really enjoying being there, but also like taking in every small detail. And in that process, helping people, alerting people to the abundance of details that are interesting around them, to the people who will like work in these places. It's like seeing a place that has become mundane or everyday to them be romanticized by someone. It's like making magic in person in live time with like all these strangers. It's transforming the way that like you get to be present with the world. So it's become like a practice, right, of like finding magic and then documenting it through these drawings and letting that be like a practice of mindfulness and presence. It's like born out of one of the quotes too I love from David White, who's a poet, and he says, "Beauty is the harvest of presence." So yes, these places are abundantly beautiful to start, but like, how do I harvest it? How do I savor it? How do I make a meal of it? And that's why I call all of the drawings Fête pour les yeux, which is French for feast for the. I started a lot of the drawings in Paris, and that theme kept going through my mind because so often I would be in these restaurants and I'd order food and I'd start sketching and I'd be so like hyper focused on the beautiful light fixture or the tassels on the chairs that like my food would grow cold. And I realized for me, I was eating with my eyes. I was filling up, with all of the textures and colors and all of these things. And so now it's like hundreds and hundreds of drawings all over the world. It moves me and orients me to look for new beauty and magic. And there's lots of ways to look at that now because I'm going to be launching the website of Fait pour les Yeux, but also there will be these stickers going out to every restaurant around the world. There's hundreds of them that are essentially like Michelin guide stickers that say magic was found here and it was drawn by me. And
I
it's a
love
way to follow
that.
the magic. Yeah, yeah. So people can
Yeah.
join in and help orient when they're in another place or a new country. You can visit the map and then see where I found beauty and go check it out.
Yeah. Do you have any drawings like nearby, like right now?
Always.
I want them to see if you are tuning in and you can give video. I want you to see what Shawa is talking about because these are not just any kind of drawings. Like,
So all drawings fit into these sketchbooks. I have always been an artist, and for a long time I was a painter. And I didn't like paint simply. I painted with like tons of mixed media and then at large scale. And I missed being an artist so much, and it made me feel like a part of my identity was lost and like I couldn't love myself fully if I wasn't practicing art. So I made sure art could always happen with me. But I have been doing these, let's see if I can find one that'll show up on the screen, because they're very intricate and people say they're like little vignette windows into little places. This is a place called home. Here's yesterday. And I always do the little logo of the place because I feel like I want to appreciate and respect the design that goes into these beautiful places, including the typographic decisions and, you know, just all the little details, because that's what makes these places magical. This is the one I did right before our conversation where I had my last feelings party.
I started off this introduction to who you are by saying that you are a person who doesn't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. Like, I really feel like people who tuned in to this episode will get a real sense of what that really means. Like, to actually live in the practice of love. I'm
Mm.
so grateful that we had this opportunity to have this conversation for you to share how you are moving and engaging in the world because it truly is. It's beautiful and it's something that I think we aspire to, but we don't even know what it looks like. And so I'm just so glad that you were able to put a language to it for our listeners. Thank you so
Mm.
much for being here.
Thank you. I hope more than anything that it looks easy, because it is. I mean, it's effortful and it's hard, but it's also easy to change your life to orient around this as a priority. But that has to be a decision. So
It
if
does.
nothing else, on if all these declarations of love on Valentine's Day, I hope that people could declare that it's time for them to be a better lover of themselves.
But it's the most liberating experience to leave the life that you thought you were supposed to live and actually step into the authenticity of who you're supposed to really be. You'll have to come back and we'll have that conversation.
Gladly, glad. Just that there's much more coming. More time.
Okay. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So, thank you all for tuning in and listening. I hope that again you were able to take away from this episode some tips and some tools, some strategies to start choosing yourself, to start accepting yourself, to start loving yourself. I think really Shawa gave us a good example of how love is also a very huge part of what we are trying to have as a revolution. So, a revolution is many things, but love and loving ourselves is a big part of it too. So, be joyful, be loving, and let's keep healing. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care. Bye.